Hey again everyone, and welcome back to the channel for another installment in our Retrospective Figure Showcase series. And for these videos, I usually like to take a look at an older figure in my collection, or as in today's case, a figure that I haven't unboxed or set up. And that's been pretty much just stored away until the right moment. And today is the right moment for this figure. So we're going to be taking a look at the last Resident Evil 5 figure I own, which is Chris Redfield in the Stars variant version. And I will tell you, without question, there was one look for this figure that really appealed to me when it was announced years ago, and is going to be how I intend to display him in the long run, and I think you'll know which one that is. But let's talk about this version of Chris. We previously looked at the BSAA version, which was actually a really incredible figure that still holds up well, regardless of the piece's age. So if you watch that review, a lot of this will be very similar, particularly in regards to the figure itself. Again, it's basically just a variant version of the character. So quick thoughts again on Resident Evil 5. I personally love the game, but it was very much a departure from the originals, which had much more limited ammo, for example. I mean, to be honest, that was part of the entire journey of those early games, saving your ammunition for moments where you had absolutely no choice. So, in these later games, with more readily available ammunition, they kind of took on a more action feel, but starting from Resident Evil 4 and progressing into 5, it felt like the feel became more one where you were just completely overwhelmed by an opposing force, and you were just taking on waves of infected. Now, I also have to admit that Resident Evil 5 was the last installment in the series I played. I missed 6 and the latest versions, and I didn't get a chance to play any of the downloadable content. It wasn't due to a lack of interest in the series, life just got in the way. Now, regarding Chris, he was a cool character, of course, with a ton of history in the series, but for this version, they definitely jacked him up. I mean, he's massive, looking more like Arnold, and I will never miss an opportunity to talk about Chris's roid rage-induced fight with a massive boulder in the game's finale. But this version is a throwback to that original unit when we first meet him in Resident Evil 1 as members of Raccoon City's Stars team. So a nice throwback to that original game, and he'll pair very nicely with the Stars version of Wesker as well. So let's take a look at the package we got here from Hot Toys. And the first thing I like to always point out with this series, Hot Toys gave you a lot of accessories and weaponry, so you get a ton of great display opportunities. And in addition, with all the figures in the line, you get the opportunity to assemble a bit of a 6-scale arsenal, inclusive of some ammo boxes and a bunch of grenades. So in this one, you're getting more of the same, with some unique pieces as well as some rehashed ones. Now you get a handgun, a revolver, the MP5, and the standout here is the minigun. You also get some grenades, a knife with a corresponding sheath, and the nice touch here is the green shirt. Now this is actually a bonus accessory that's meant to go with the BSAA version of Chris. So pretty nice touch, and Hot Toys used to actually do this a lot, where they would throw in some accessories that were meant to supplement other releases, and they still do it actually. For example, the Deluxe Carnage included that alternate Eddie Brock transforming head that could be used with the original Venom release. But that aside, let's take a closer look at the accessories, and we're going to start with the single alternate hand that's included here. Pretty standard and a far cry from the slew of hands we get these days, but it basically provided you with a second gun holding hand, with the long glove sliding this into the arm and the wrist socket became pretty straightforward. And there's still some nice details here, showing some stitch work along the glove as well as the reinforced protective pieces over the knuckles. Next up, you get a knife with a sheath. These do seem a little bit lackluster. They don't have as many details as we're used to. Let's look at the knife first. It's fully plastic and does have some okay detailing on the blade, showing the sloped in straight edge with some minor serrated teeth near the base or handle. Handle's molded with a nice texture and the paintwork's decent. Now the sheath is a nice dark brown, and it has some decent details replicating the stitchwork along the edges. Unfortunately, there are issues, and you'll see those as we place this on the figure later on. So the tie that's meant to go around the knife handle is plastic, and there's a hole on one side and a peg on the other, but the peg doesn't fit. Maybe an easy modification to try to enlarge the opening on the other side of the tie, but without actually modifying it, it just doesn't close and stays open. And also the way it connects to the gear with these clips, they're a little oversized, and the knife just has a tendency to fall off the kit, so not great, unfortunately. Next up, you get two sidearms. The first one is a Beretta with a laser sight on the underside of the gun. Looks really good with a nice bit of weathering and dry brushing to give you that feel of a used piece. Also included is a removable clip, and the gun does have some functions including a working slide. So nice details overall, although it's definitely a piece we've seen before in this line. The new weapon here is the revolver with the long barrel. Pretty unique, and also feels modern with the rail on top for attachments. Hammer does pull back, and you do get a rotating cylinder that also pops out. So really nice piece, although I do feel like the handle and grip might be a little bit undersized for the hands you have here. Now, next weapon we saw with Jill, we saw with Wesker, and we're seeing it here again, and that's the HK MP5. Look, I don't mind having multiples. This is an iconic piece, and it goes well with all of the figures in their tactical getup. Submachine gun here looks great with a nice matte black paint finish on the forward grip, and just like with the previous versions, there's some nice detail work. That becomes fairly obvious with the safety, where if you can see it zoomed in, you can see the different modes from single shot all the way to full auto. So that's a nice bit of attention to detail, especially for an older figure and accessory. Alright, so now let's get into the star piece for me that was included with this figure, and that's the minigun. Now, it's not as realistic as, say, what we got with the T-800 or with the Punisher, but I don't think it's meant to be, right? After all, it's kind of modeled after the video game version. The barrel fully rotates and has some nice metallic paint apps and weathering extending back to the main body of the gun, which has the exhaust port along with some really great detail work at the handle, including some painted switches at the rear of the gun. Really nice and bulky overall, and it's sized to go nicely with Chris. Next up, you get the ammo pack, and the first thing that strikes me here is the size of this piece. It's massive. We get some packs like this with the T600s from the Hot Toys Terminator Salvation line, but this pack eclipses those in size. It really is pretty enormous, almost laughably so. But again, it just goes well with the bulked up form of Chris Redfield here. But look, even beyond the size, the other thing that's really striking is the detail work and the weathering. This thing is beat up with dents and gashes throughout, mixed in with the pretty nicely done metallic paintwork. Shoulder straps are also nice with that dual color, with a light, almost tan, and then a darker green. And it does include working clips to lock this onto the figure. So really imposing, which is what makes it stand out. And then moving to less impressive pieces, you get 3 pouches that get placed on the figure's belt, although they are that older modular system, and you basically have to hook them onto the belt and thread kind of a strap back into the pouch to lock it in. It's not the best. So I just feel like sometimes the pouches do feel a little bit loose and you can't get a nice tight grab on the belt, and they do tend to fall off the belt if you put too much pressure on them. One of the pouches is also key because it holds the radio, so just be careful with it. It still feels old school, but at least on the figure they look okay. Now last up, you get that radio piece, and it's done pretty well with a really thin wire that runs up to part of the radio that gets clipped onto the near his shoulder, and then the earpiece itself, which wraps nicely around the sculpt's ear. Radio has some nice detail work on the front face as well. Feels more modern than some of their older pieces, but overall really well done. Okay, so now finally getting to the figure, we'll start with the sculpt. Very much, actually pretty much identical to the previous version, and I think it looks good when you compare it to the game's version. The hair is actually nicely detailed, not as good as present day figures, but still really good for its time period, and the eyes are done nicely and look pretty lifelike. Other highlight here for me is definitely the detailing on the facial hair with the stubble. It is actually kind of molded and sculpted in, and it looks good, but you do have to look closely to see that detail work. So overall, not bad. Now the rest of the figure, first thing I'll say when holding him, he is heavy. Not sure what kind of body Hot Toys used, but there's a solid feel to him. That also does help to balance him when he's wearing that big pack. As far as the uniform, shirt is much more forgiving than the BSAA version, which is way too tight. Here there's a little more flexibility. Now, at least in my version, there's a lot of yellowing on both the shirt and the vest. I'm pretty sure this is age related and that the figure wasn't purposely weathered up like that. Doesn't really annoy me, but just something I noticed. Now the shirt does have that nice arm patch that's embroidered, but glued on, that has the Stars logo, and the back of his vest has the Stars insignia screen printed on has the Stars insignia screen printed on it. Overall, it's a much simpler uniform, but it still looks good with the belts and the drop-down leg holster, which is nicely done in rubber, so at least there's no chance of pleather rot here. Pants are pretty standard, but the knee pads are actually nice, and they actually are pretty thick, so it feels like they would offer a nice bit of protection. And finally, we come down to the boots, which look like an older style army boot with the green and black. It's all molded, but there is amazing detail work here, and it really goes well with the figure. So overall, pretty impressed with the work Hot Toys did here. And even though it is an older figure, I think it still looks great. Is it perfect? No. Like most figures, there are a few issues that I'll get into, but just fully kit up with the radio, the earpiece, the knife on the chest, and the gun in the holster, he looks really good. But we have to talk issues, right? First, I mentioned it before, that knife sheath, it looks okay, but it just wants to fall off the chest strap all the time. Clips just don't squeeze down enough on the fabric, so any little nudge or major reposing, it's going to drop, and then of course, you're going to have to reposition it. And then of course, the fact that the tie strap doesn't close and just stays splayed open, visually doesn't look great. Had it been a fabric piece, it would have maybe draped more naturally and been better visually. I do have to try to modify it a little bit to get it to close, just so it doesn't look as bad. Other annoying thing is the body too. These old muscle bodies can pose surprisingly well, but they take a lot of work, and I swear you feel like you're going to end up breaking something. And also because of the rubber material, even if you've posed the arm in a certain way, you do get a bounce back effect, so when trying to pose the figure, the guns won't look as good. Just a little annoying and requires some patience. But besides that, the minigun looks incredible. That look alone is what sold me on this figure. Sure, one of the hands that grips the forward handle of the gun doesn't work great, but visually looks stunning. Chris Redfield looks like someone that you would not want to run into, and that you definitely run away from in a heartbeat. And surprisingly, the oversized pack actually works with him. To me, this is kind of the definitive look for this figure, with the pack and the minigun. Rest of the pieces look great, but this just definitely provides a standout look. So a figure that I think holds up well, and that at least for now brings my Resident Evil 5 series to a close. Again, I do regret selling the Shiva Alamar because she's the missing piece right now, but you've got figures still coming out, third party and licensed, so maybe there's still a chance, especially if Capcom redoes the game. I may try to also do like a quick retrospective series review and put all the figures out just to see how the set looks all together. But again, for now, just a quick unboxing of another older great figure that to me still holds up well. Let me know your thoughts on this one and the line, and as always, thanks for watching, and if you're enjoying the content, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing, and we'll touch base on the next video.